The morning sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban street as a young woman approached her friend's house. Something stopped her cold on the front walkway. A feeling, a moment of recognition that the world had shifted overnight in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The front door stood unlocked. 3 vehicles parked outside. Inside, purses with wallets still containing cash and credit cards sat abandoned. Cigarettes left in an ashtray. Jewelry removed and placed carefully on nightstands. 3 women's clothing folded neatly, as if they had simply stepped away for a moment. But they hadn't stepped away for a moment. They had vanished completely. 3 women, a mother and 2 recent high school graduates, gone without warning. No signs of forced entry. No evidence of violence. No witnesses to their departure. Just emptiness where 3 lives should have been. How do 3 adults disappear from a home in a populated neighborhood without a single scream heard, without a struggle, without leaving behind evidence of what or who took them? This isn't just a missing persons case. This is one of the most profound mysteries in American criminal history. A case that would consume a city, baffle investigators, and remain unsolved for decades. A disappearance that defies conventional explanation and continues to haunt everyone who encounters it. Welcome to our investigation of the 3 who vanished without a trace. A case that forces us to question everything we think we know about how people disappear. A mystery where the most disturbing element isn't what was found at the scene, but what wasn't. The clock is ticking. The evidence grows colder. And somewhere, someone holds the truth about what happened that summer night in 1992. June 6th, 1992. A day meant for celebration in this Midwestern town. 2 young women, we'll call them Michelle and Sarah, stand in blue caps and gowns, their futures stretching before them bright and limitless. Their laughter carries across the football field as tassels are turned and diplomas exchanged. No one could have known these would be the last photos ever taken of them. As evening descended, the celebration continued. Michelle and Sarah moved between graduation parties, their appearances documented through the recollections of dozens of friends and acquaintances. Each interaction, each casual goodbye now, scrutinized for clues that might have foreshadowed what was coming. They were just normal teenagers celebrating. One friend would later tell investigators. There was nothing unusual about their behavior. Nothing to suggest they were afraid or concerned about anything. By midnight, exhaustion had begun to set in. The girls altered their plans. Instead of continuing to another celebration, they decided to spend the night at Michelle's house, where her mother, Linda, age 47, was likely already asleep. This seemingly inconsequential decision to return to Michelle's home rather than continue to another friend's house as originally planned would become the first link in a chain of events that remains unbroken to this day. Linda, a respected local hairdresser and single mother, had spent a quiet evening at home. Neighbors reported seeing her watering plants early in the evening. A phone call confirmed her presence at the residence around 9:15 p.m. No one suspected that within hours, all 3 women would be gone without explanation. Morning arrived on June 7th. The early summer sun illuminated a neighborhood unaware that it would soon become the epicenter of a mystery. At approximately 9 a.m., a young woman named Jessica and her boyfriend arrived at the residence. They had plans to meet Sarah and Michelle for a day trip to a water park, a continuation of the graduation celebrations. What they found would forever alter the course of their lives. The front door was unlocked. Unusual, but not immediately alarming. They called out. No answer. They stepped inside. The house appeared oddly undisturbed. 3 purses sat within easy reach, containing wallets, money, credit cards. Car keys rested on a coffee table. Outside, 3 vehicles remained parked in the driveway. It was like they had vanished in the middle of something ordinary. Jessica would later recount. Their cigarettes were in an ashtray. A book lay open on the couch. Linda's eyeglasses were still there. Everything that women would normally take if they were leaving the house. Everything was still there. In the bedrooms, the scene grew more perplexing. Clothing had been removed and folded with unusual precision. Jewelry placed carefully on nightstands. The beds appeared to have been slept in. Outside, the glass globe covering the porch light lay shattered on the ground. More strangely, the glass had been neatly swept into a small pile, as if someone had begun cleaning up but had been interrupted. Jessica's confusion gradually transformed into unease. She made a call to Sarah's parents. Within minutes, what started as mild concern erupted into desperate phone calls and growing panic. Where would 3 women go in the middle of the night without purses, without identification, without their vehicles? The question hung in the air, unanswered. It remains unanswered today. The morning hours ticked by with mounting dread. At first, those closest to the women grasped for rational explanations. Perhaps they had gone for an early breakfast. Maybe they stepped out for morning errands. But each passing hour dismantled these comforting theories. Who leaves without a purse? Without a wallet? Without house keys? By early afternoon, Sarah's mother contacted local authorities. The officer who arrived found himself facing an unprecedented scenario. No signs of forced entry, no evidence of violence, yet 3 women inexplicably absent. It was unlike anything I'd encountered in 15 years on the force, the responding officer would later state. Most missing persons cases give you something to work with, an argument, a history of troubles, a witness who saw something. Here we had nothing. What investigators didn't yet realize was that the crime scene, if indeed it was a crime scene, had been compromised beyond recovery. Throughout the morning, concerned friends and family had moved through the house, touching surfaces, using the telephone, disturbing potential evidence in their desperate search for answers. By the time investigators began processing the scene, dozens of fingerprints, footprints, and potential DNA evidence had been hopelessly contaminated. This seemingly innocent parade of visitors may have unwittingly erased critical clues forever. Police documented everything left behind. Cigarettes in an ashtray, a novel bookmarked mid-chapter, 3 toothbrushes in the bathroom, clothing neatly arranged, makeup and jewelry in their proper places, money in purses, personal identification cards in wallets. The evidence suggested no one had been planning to leave. It presented a frozen moment in time, as if the 3 women had simply dissolved into the night air. As evening approached, and the second sunset since their disappearance began to fall, a troubling reality settled over the investigation. This was not a routine missing persons case. This was something else entirely. To understand the profound nature of this disappearance, we must understand who these women were. The lives interrupted on that summer night in 1992. Linda, 47, was a fixture in the community, a hairdresser who had built a loyal clientele over decades. She was known for her reliability and warmth. A single mother who had raised her daughter largely on her own, she maintained a modest but comfortable home. She never missed an appointment. Her salon manager recounted. Not once in 15 years. Linda was the type of person who would call if she was going to be 5 minutes late. Financial records showed stability. Phone records revealed no unusual calls. Friends reported no concerns, no strange behavior, no mention of threats or fears. By all accounts, Linda's life was ordinary in the most reassuring ways. Michelle, her 19-year-old daughter, had just completed high school. Described by teachers as creative and independent, she had recently ended a relationship with a boyfriend named Thomas. What initially appeared as background information would later take on greater significance when investigators discovered Michelle had recently testified against Thomas in a burglary case. She wasn't afraid of him. One friend insisted. She was moving on with her life. And then there was Sarah, 18, Michelle's classmate and friend. Sarah came from a close-knit family, maintained excellent grades, and had already been accepted to a state university where she planned to study nursing. Her parents described her as responsible and cautious. She always called if plans changed. Her mother would tell anyone who would listen in the days following the disappearance. Always. She would never have just gone somewhere without telling me. 3 women. 3 lives in progress. 1 inexplicable absence. What stands out most about this case is what wasn't found at the scene. No signs of struggle. No evidence of force, no suggestion of panic. Whatever occurred that night happened quickly, quietly, and completely. 3 days into the investigation, a potential breakthrough emerged. The emergency dispatch center received an anonymous call from a man who claimed to have information about unusual activity near Linda's residence on the night of the disappearance. The recording begins with static, then a male voice speaking hurriedly. I need to report something I saw near that house where those women went missing. There was someone, and then, through what investigators would later call a catastrophic technical error, the remainder of the call was not properly recorded. Only fragments remained, with the caller apparently describing a vehicle and someone moving between houses in the early morning hours. The dispatcher attempted to get a callback number, a name, any identifying information. The caller refused and disconnected. This call represented our first potential eyewitness, the lead detective explained, and we lost most of it due to equipment failure. What makes this piece of evidence particularly compelling is the timing. The call came before certain details of the case had been released to the public. The caller knew specifics about the residents that suggested they had indeed been in the vicinity. Voice analysis experts were brought in to examine the fragments that remained. They noted distinctive speech patterns and a potential regional accent. But without more audio to analyze, they could not create a voice profile detailed enough to identify a suspect. The handling of this call would later become a point of significant controversy. Why wasn't the caller instructed to come to the station immediately? Why wasn't a trace put on the line? The answers to these questions reveal the chaotic nature of the early investigation, a period when authorities were still trying to determine if they were dealing with a criminal case at all. This mysterious caller has never come forward again, despite numerous public appeals. Whatever they saw, whatever they know, remains locked away just beyond the reach of investigators. As the first week of the investigation unfolded, authorities found themselves facing a case unlike any in departmental memory. The evidence, or rather, the lack of evidence, forced investigators to consider scenarios that defied conventional understanding of how crimes occur. The absence of forced entry suggested someone the women knew and trusted, explained the case's lead detective. Yet the totality of the scene pointed to something more complex. We were looking at the possibility of multiple victims taken by either a highly organized individual or potentially multiple perpetrators. The working theory that emerged focused on the critical window between approximately 2:15 a.m., when Michelle and Sarah likely arrived at the house, and 8 a.m., when neighbors reported nothing unusual at the residence. Within this 6-hour period, 3 adults disappeared without alerting neighbors, without creating disturbances, without leaving obvious signs of resistance. Investigators meticulously reconstructed the timeline. 2:15 a.m. Michelle and Sarah presumed to arrive at residence unknown time. Porch light broken unknown time. Someone sweeps glass in a pile unknown time. All 3 women are removed from or leave the residence 8 a.m. Neighbor notices nothing unusual about the property 9:15 a.m. Jessica arrives and discovers the women missing. Each scenario investigators developed encountered significant obstacles. A voluntary departure seemed impossible given what was left behind. A single intruder subduing 3 adults without creating enough noise to alert neighbors seemed implausible. Multiple perpetrators increased the likelihood of witnesses or evidence. Yet the scene existed. 3 women were gone. At this point, we had to accept we were dealing with something extraordinary. One detective acknowledged. Either in its simplicity or its complexity, this crime fell outside our investigative experience. As days turned to weeks, the case took root in the community's consciousness. They were facing an adversary who had accomplished what should have been impossible: the complete removal of 3 individuals without leaving behind meaningful evidence of how it was achieved. Every investigation has elements that serve as anchors, concrete facts that guide theories and shape understanding. In this case, those anchors were unsettlingly few, but each carried profound implications. The broken porch light emerged as perhaps the most tantalizing physical evidence. The glass globe that once covered the bulb had been shattered. More telling was what happened next. Someone had taken time to sweep the glass fragments into a neat pile on the porch. This suggests the porch light was broken before the women vanished, explained a forensic analyst assigned to the case. The act of sweeping indicates a period of normalcy after the breakage. Someone, either one of the women or the individual responsible for their disappearance, had the presence of mind to begin cleaning up. Was the broken light a lure? A way to get one of the women to open the door? Or merely an accident followed by an interrupted cleanup? Equally puzzling was the state of the answering machine. Friends reported calling the residence repeatedly after discovering the women missing. Those calls should have accumulated on the machine's tape. Yet when investigators examined it, the tape had been completely erased. Someone deliberately cleared that machine, stated the lead detective. Whether it was to remove evidence of calls made to the residents that night or to eliminate messages left afterward, we cannot say with certainty. The women's vehicles remained in the driveway, untouched and undisturbed. 3 cars immobilized as effectively as their owners. Perhaps the most troubling question remained the silence. How did 3 women disappear without a single neighbor reporting unusual sounds? The houses on either side were occupied that night. Windows were open due to the summer weather. For 3 adults to be removed against their will, without creating enough noise to alert anyone, defies standard patterns of abduction, noted a criminal psychologist consulted on the case. It suggests either a level of compliance that's difficult to explain or a methodology outside typical criminal behavior. These elements, taken together, point to a carefully planned and executed act, one that accounted for and overcame the natural obstacles inherent in removing 3 adults from a home simultaneously. As with any investigation involving missing women, authorities first examined those closest to the victims, particularly individuals with recent conflicts or grievances. Michelle's former boyfriend, Thomas, quickly became a focus. Their relationship had ended weeks before the disappearance, and more significantly, Michelle had recently testified against Thomas in a burglary case. Court records show her testimony was instrumental in his conviction. Anytime you have recent legal proceedings involving a victim, it creates an obvious avenue of investigation, explained the district attorney who had prosecuted the burglary case. There was clear potential for resentment or retaliation. Investigators established Thomas's whereabouts on the night of June 6th through multiple witness statements and physical evidence. He had attended a gathering with friends approximately 30 miles from the women's residence. Security camera footage from a convenience store confirmed his presence at crucial hours during the timeline. The investigation expanded to include Thomas's associates, particularly those connected to the burglary case. 2 other individuals had been implicated alongside Thomas, one of whom had made statements expressing anger toward Michelle. One of these associates, whom we'll call David, initially provided inconsistent accounts of his whereabouts. However, these inconsistencies were ultimately attributed to intoxication rather than deception. His presence at a different social gathering was eventually confirmed by multiple witnesses. Investigators also explored a series of prowler reports that had emerged in the weeks preceding the disappearance. 3 separate households within a 10-block radius had reported unusual activity, glimpses of someone in yards, strange noises at night, a screen removed from a window. We couldn't establish a definitive connection, the lead detective acknowledged, but the timing and proximity were concerning enough to warrant thorough examination. Each potential suspect was interviewed multiple times. Each alibi was verified, then verified again. Each lead was pursued to its conclusion. Yet, as the investigation progressed, these conventional avenues yielded nothing substantial. The case was beginning to challenge fundamental assumptions about how such crimes occur and who commits them. By the second week, the magnitude of the case had outgrown the resources of the local police department. A multi-jurisdictional task force was assembled, bringing together local detectives, state investigators, and FBI specialists in abduction cases. We moved operations to a larger facility, recalled the police chief. We had 20 investigators working in shifts, following up on hundreds of tips that were coming in daily. The scale was unprecedented for our department. Media coverage transformed what might have been a local tragedy into a national mystery. Major networks broadcast images of the 3 women into millions of homes. Their faces appeared on newspapers across the country. The case that had begun in a modest suburban home now occupied the national consciousness. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. The police department established dedicated phone lines to handle the volume of calls. Some brought valuable information, potential sightings, suspicious activities noted in nearby areas. Many others offered theories ranging from plausible to fantastical. As conventional investigative methods yielded few results, desperate family members turned to unconventional approaches. Several psychics, and self-proclaimed mediums contacted the families offering assistance. While investigators maintained professional skepticism, the family's desperation was such that all avenues seemed worth pursuing. One psychic in particular gained prominence after claiming to have visions of the women in a cave system beneath the city. Despite law enforcement's reluctance, volunteer search parties organized expeditions into local cave networks, diverting valuable resources and public attention. False leads accumulated rapidly. A waitress in Oklahoma believed she served the three women breakfast. A truck driver reported picking up hitchhikers matching their description. A motel clerk in Arkansas claimed they had checked in using different names. Each lead required investigation. Each investigation consumed precious time and resources. Each dead and increased the growing sense that this case defied conventional resolution. The hardest part wasn't the complexity, one detective would later reflect. It was the simplicity. Three people don't just vanish. It's not possible. It happened, and we couldn't explain how. 1 month into the investigation, what appeared to be a significant breakthrough emerged. Two separate witnesses reported seeing three women who matched the missing women's descriptions in a parking garage approximately 70 miles from their hometown. The first witness, a parking attendant, described seeing three women who appeared distressed in the company of a man in his 30s. The women were entering a van with out-of-state license plates. The older woman seemed to be crying, the attendant stated in his official report. One of the younger women looked like she was trying to calm her down. Something about it struck me as unusual, but not enough that I intervened. 3 days later, a second witness, a maintenance worker in the same garage, came forward after seeing news coverage of the case. His account corroborated key details. Three women matching the general description of Linda, Michelle, and Sarah, a light-colored van, a male driver acting with unusual urgency. Investigators assigned high priority to these reports. The witnesses were interviewed separately multiple times, their accounts remaining consistent in core details. Both successfully completed credibility assessments designed to identify fabrication or attention-seeking behavior. These represented our most promising lead, the FBI agent assigned to the case explained. Two unconnected witnesses reporting similar observations within the same time frame and location. The statistical likelihood of coincidental false reports was extremely low. A dedicated team began exhaustive work tracking down every van matching the description that had passed through the area. License plate data was collected from toll booths, gas stations, and traffic cameras. Dozens of vehicle owners were identified, located, and interviewed. After weeks of investigation, the lead collapsed under its own weight. The witnesses remained credible, but every potential vehicle was accounted for. Every driver had verifiable alibis or could be ruled out through other means. The descriptions, while similar, contained enough inconsistencies to create doubt about whether the women observed were actually the missing three. Eyewitness testimony is notoriously unreliable, noted a forensic psychologist who reviewed the witness statements. These witnesses believed what they reported, but human perception and memory are highly susceptible to contamination, especially after media exposure to the case. The parking garage sighting remains one of the investigation's most tantalizing unresolved elements. Credible reports that led nowhere, witnesses who saw something significant but couldn't provide the crucial detail that would break the case open. 6 months after the disappearance, as the case was beginning to cool, an emergency room nurse working at a hospital nearly 200 miles away came forward with information that temporarily reignited the investigation. The nurse reported treating a disoriented middle-aged woman who bore a striking resemblance to Linda. The patient had arrived at the emergency department without identification, unable or unwilling to provide her name or explain how she had been injured. She had bruising consistent with restraints, the nurse recalled in her statement to investigators. And there was something about her behavior, a kind of watchfulness, a fear that went beyond typical confusion. She wouldn't make eye contact with male staff members. What made this report particularly compelling was the timing. The woman had been treated approximately 2 weeks after the disappearance. Hospital policy required photographing unidentified patients, but a review of records revealed a critical error. The woman had been discharged before photographs could be taken. We treated her for dehydration and minor lacerations, the attending physician reported. She was coherent enough to refuse additional treatment. Legally, we couldn't hold her against her will. The investigation team descended on the hospital, interviewing every staff member who had contact with the mystery patient. They reviewed security footage, but discovered that the camera covering the relevant entrance had been malfunctioning that night. Almost 5 years after the disappearance, construction began on an expansion to a regional medical center parking garage. During excavation, a worker approached the site manager with concerns about a section of concrete that appeared different from the surrounding foundation. It looked newer, the worker would later testify, and it had been poured in a way that didn't match the original construction methods. Anyone in the business would notice it immediately. Anonymous tips began reaching both police and local journalists, suggesting the site contained human remains, specifically the remains of the 3 missing women. The timing was significant. The original parking structure had been completed approximately 7 months after the women's disappearance. Records confirmed that the concrete in question had indeed been poured later than the surrounding sections, the result of what project managers described as design modifications during construction. When investigators arrived, they faced a complex problem. Ground-penetrating radar was brought in to examine the site. The results were inconclusive, but indicated anomalies consistent with disturbed soil beneath the concrete. The technology has limitations, explained the forensic technician who operated the equipment. What we could say with certainty was that something was there that differed from the surrounding area. What that something was, we couldn't determine without excavation. The investigation reached an impasse. Excavation would require breaking through a critical structural element of an active parking facility used by emergency vehicles. Hospital administrators expressed concerns about disrupting medical services. The cost of temporary facilities and structural reinforcement would exceed several $100,000. Families of the missing women pleaded for excavation. Law enforcement was divided on whether the evidence justified such extensive disruption and expense. We couldn't rule it out as a possibility, admitted the detective who had been with the case from the beginning. But we also couldn't ignore the significant issues with the theory. Why transport 3 bodies over 60 miles? Why bury them in such a public location with dozens of workers present daily? Legal battles ensued. Court orders were sought. Public pressure mounted on both sides. To this day, the concrete remains unbroken, the space beneath unexplored. It stands as a physical manifestation of the case itself, a solid barrier behind which answers might lie, but which remains impenetrable. Throughout the investigation, one element appeared repeatedly in witness statements. A green van seen in the vicinity of Linda's home in the days before and potentially the night of the disappearance. The first mention came from a neighbor who reported seeing an unfamiliar green van parked across the street 2 days before the women vanished. It wasn't from our neighborhood, the neighbor insisted. I noticed these things. It was there for hours with no one inside. 3 additional witnesses described seeing a similar vehicle. A paperboy reported nearly colliding with a green van while on his route around 4:30 a.m. the morning of the disappearance. A couple returning late from an anniversary dinner noted a green van driving slowly through the neighborhood with its lights off. What's remarkable is that these reports emerged independently, noted the case coordinator. The witnesses came forward at different times, were interviewed by different officers, yet described similar vehicles. The descriptions, however, contained frustrating inconsistencies. One witness described the van as dark forest green, another as light mint green. 2 witnesses recalled it as a Chevrolet model. Another was certain it was a Ford. License plate recollections varied wildly. Some remembered partial numbers. Others recalled letters that contradicted each other. Law enforcement launched an exhaustive search. Every green van registered within a 200-mile radius was located and examined. Hundreds of vehicle owners were interviewed, their whereabouts during the critical period established. A breakthrough appeared imminent when investigators located a green van whose owner had a prior conviction for assault and no verifiable alibi for the night in question. Forensic teams examined the vehicle exhaustively. We tore that van apart, one crime scene technician recalled. We pulled up flooring, removed paneling, tested every surface for blood residue or DNA. We found nothing conclusive. The green van like so many elements in this case, remained suspended between significance and coincidence. Was it central to the women's disappearance, or merely a random vehicle that took on importance through the lens of a community searching desperately for answers? Human perception is flawed, explained a forensic psychologist who studied the witness statements. Once a detail enters public consciousness, it can contaminate subsequent recollections. People begin seeing what they expect to see, remembering what fits the established narrative. Whether the green van was instrumental in the crime or a psychological artifact of a community in crisis remains one of the case's most enduring questions. 7 years after the disappearance, a name emerged that would become inextricably linked with the case: Richard Nelson. Nelson was no stranger to law enforcement. His criminal record stretched back decades, including convictions for abduction and assault. More disturbingly, he had been present in the same Midwestern city when the 3 women vanished, a fact confirmed through employment records and rental agreements. What catapulted Nelson from potential suspect to central figure was a series of cryptic statements he began making while incarcerated for unrelated crimes. During an interview with a journalist investigating cold cases, Nelson made an offhand comment that sent shockwaves through the investigation. "Those women from '92, he reportedly said, "they'll never find them. They're not dead. They're alive somewhere, wishing they were dead." When pressed for details, Nelson smiled and declined further comment. The journalist immediately contacted authorities, who arranged a formal interview. During this official questioning, Nelson denied having made the comment, but continued to display what investigators described as unusual interest and knowledge about case specifics. Over subsequent years, Nelson's commentary on the case evolved into a psychological chess game with investigators. He would occasionally drop hints suggesting intimate knowledge, then recant or claim he was merely repeating information he'd heard from media accounts. To one prison chaplain, he reportedly confided, "I know where they are. I've always known, but they'll never be found because they're not where anyone is looking." Investigators faced a complex problem. Nelson was undeniably present in the area when the women disappeared. His criminal history included similar offenses. His statements suggested knowledge beyond public information, yet there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime. No witness had reported seeing him near the residence. His psychological profile indicated a pattern of inserting himself into high-profile cases for attention or privileges. "He's either our perpetrator or the most sophisticated taunter I've encountered in 30 years of law enforcement," stated the FBI behavioral analyst assigned to evaluate Nelson. Either way, his statements tell us something profound about this case, either what happened or how deeply it has penetrated public consciousness. Nelson remains a figure of profound ambiguity in the case. Impossible to dismiss entirely, yet equally impossible to conclusively implicate. To this day, he occasionally makes cryptic comments about the case to prison officials or fellow inmates, each statement analyzed exhaustively for the fragment of truth that might finally break the investigation open. As decades passed without resolution, alternative theories emerged, each attempting to explain what conventional investigation could not. The organized crime connection gained prominence after a retired detective publicly suggested the case might have links to regional criminal networks. His theory centered on Linda's occupation as a hairdresser, a profession that places individuals in close contact with diverse clients, occasionally privy to confidential conversations. "It's possible she overheard something she wasn't meant to hear," the detective proposed. Information valuable or damaging enough to warrant extraordinary measures. Financial investigations revealed nothing unusual in any of the women's accounts. No unexplained deposits, no suspicious withdrawals. Linda's client records showed no connections to known criminal figures. Yet the theory persisted, fueled by the inexplicable totality of the disappearance. The mistaken identity hypothesis offered another framework. This theory suggested the intended target was someone else, perhaps another resident of the neighborhood, and the 3 women were taken due to a catastrophic error by the perpetrator. This would explain the lack of apparent motive, noted a criminal psychologist who reviewed the case. It also potentially explains why 3 women were taken rather than just one. Once the mistake was realized, no witnesses could be left behind. Support for this theory came from a curious coincidence. Approximately 3 blocks from Linda's residence lived another woman who physically resembled her and who had recently received threats related to her work in the county prosecutor's office. Perhaps the most troubling theory involved multiple perpetrators, potentially individuals with law enforcement training or knowledge. This would explain the remarkable efficiency of the abduction, the absence of evidence, and the ability to control 3 adults simultaneously. We have to consider all possibilities, admitted the lead detective in a rare public statement 10 years into the investigation, including those that are deeply uncomfortable to contemplate. Each theory addresses certain aspects of the case while leaving others unexplained. Each has its proponents and detractors among investigators, family members, and the community. Each highlights different aspects of a mystery that continues to resist conventional understanding. What remains consistent across all theories is the fundamental question that has haunted this case from the beginning. How do 3 women vanish from a home without struggle, without witnesses, without physical evidence, leaving behind all personal belongings? The answer to this question, whether mundane or extraordinary, remains elusive. For the families left behind, the disappearance created a unique form of grief, one without closure, without certainty, suspended indefinitely between hope and mourning. The hardest part is not knowing, Sarah's mother explained during an interview marking the 10th anniversary of the disappearance. Is she alive? Is she suffering? Should I be mourning or searching? Every phone call, every knock at the door carries this terrible hope that maybe, finally, we'll know something. The case transformed the families in profound ways. Sarah's parents became advocates for missing persons investigations, establishing a foundation that provides resources to families facing similar circumstances. The foundation has helped implement improved protocols for adult missing persons cases nationwide. Michelle's extended family faced a different journey. Internal disagreements about how to proceed, whether to accept the likelihood of death or maintain unwavering hope, created fractures that widened with time. Some family members eventually moved away, seeking distance from constant reminders and media attention. Linda's siblings maintain a yearly vigil at the site of the disappearance. What began as a gathering of hundreds has gradually reduced to dozens, though the community's support remains steadfast. This case became part of our collective identity, explained a longtime resident. It changed how parents raise their children here. It changed how people view their safety, their community, their neighbors. Local law enforcement experienced organizational transformation in response to criticism of the initial investigation. New protocols for preservation of crime scenes, handling of tips, and coordination with outside agencies were implemented. The department's current missing persons response procedures are directly informed by lessons learned from this case. The city itself bears physical reminders of the mystery. The house where the women disappeared stands unoccupied, passing through several owners unable to live with its history. Memorial benches bearing the women's names occupy a quiet corner of a community park, and throughout the city, certain residents still routinely check unfamiliar vehicles, still report unusual activities with heightened vigilance. When something like this happens, noted a community psychologist who worked with affected residents, it doesn't just traumatize individuals. It traumatizes the collective consciousness of a place. The sense that it can't happen here is shattered, and that changes everything. As technology evolves, cold cases like this one receive periodic renewed attention, with modern forensic techniques applied to evidence preserved decades earlier. In 2007, advances in DNA analysis allowed investigators to re-examine items from the women's residence. Using techniques that could detect genetic material invisible to earlier methods, forensic scientists tested dozens of items: doorknobs, light switches, the broken porch-like glass, bedding, and personal effects. The technology allows us to see what was previously unseeable, explained the forensic laboratory director. We can now detect and analyze DNA from a single skin cell, from a fingerprint that's been wiped away, from surfaces that appear clean to the naked eye. The results proved both promising and frustrating. Several previously unidentified DNA profiles were recovered, potential evidence of individuals who had been in the residence. Cross-referencing these profiles against law enforcement databases yielded no matches. The profiles remained cataloged, waiting for potential future matches. In 2013, ground-penetrating radar technology had advanced significantly beyond what was available when the parking garage was first examined. A specialized team volunteered their services, bringing equipment capable of creating three-dimensional subsurface images with remarkable clarity. The new scans confirmed anomalies beneath the concrete, but provided crucial additional details. The disruptions in soil density formed patterns consistent with construction debris rather than human remains. While not definitively ruling out the possibility, these findings significantly reduced the likelihood of the site containing the missing women. Social media and crowdsourced investigation brought both benefits and complications to the case. Online communities dedicated to solving cold cases assembled comprehensive timelines, unearthed obscure public records, and identified witnesses who had never been formally interviewed. The collective intelligence of thousands of motivated individuals can uncover connections that might otherwise remain hidden, noted a detective specializing in cold cases. But it also generates enormous volumes of unverified information that must be carefully evaluated. The most significant recent development came in 2018, when advanced facial recognition software was applied to surveillance footage from businesses near the women's residence. This analysis identified a vehicle passing multiple times in the hours before the disappearance. A vehicle that matched one associated with a now-deceased sex offender who had never been connected to the case. Investigation into this potential suspect continues, his death eliminating certain investigative avenues while opening others, such as the ability to search properties without warrant requirements. Cold cases are never truly cold, insisted the current lead investigator. They simply wait for new technology, new information, or new perspectives to illuminate what was previously hidden. Nearly 3 decades have passed since the summer night, when 3 women vanished without explanation. In that time, their absence has created its own presence, a persistent void that continues to affect individual lives and collective consciousness. The local high school from which Michelle and Sarah graduated maintains 3 permanent empty seats at each commencement ceremony. The symbols are simple, seats with the women's graduation years marked, adorned with white roses, but their impact remains profound. It reminds us that some stories don't have neat conclusions, explain the current principle. It honors not just who they were, but who they might have become. The doctors, teachers, mothers they might have been. The 3 women's names have become permanently associated with legislative change. The 3 Women's Act, passed in their state in 2004, significantly reformed how missing adults cases are handled by law enforcement. Previously, adult disappearances were often treated with less urgency than missing children cases. The new protocols established mandatory immediate response regardless of age. Digital memorials maintain their presence in contemporary society. Websites devoted to the case receive thousands of visitors monthly. Annual remembrance events are live-streamed to followers worldwide who have developed emotional connections to women they never met. It's the unresolved nature of it, suggested a sociologist who studies public reactions to high-profile cases. Our minds crave completion. These 3 women represent an open narrative that our collective consciousness keeps returning to, hoping for resolution. For the younger generation in the community, the case exists somewhere between history and urban legend. Local schools incorporate the case into curriculum units on community awareness and safety. The women's story is told not to frighten, but to educate. Perhaps most significantly, the investigation itself never truly ended. The case remains officially active, with a detective still assigned part-time. Tips continue to arrive, dozens each year, each evaluated against the extensive case files. We owe it to these women and their families to continue, stated the current police chief. Time passes, but our commitment doesn't diminish. Someone knows what happened that night. Someone carries that knowledge. We believe that someday they will share it. The three empty chairs at graduation ceremonies, the annual vigils, the online communities, the ongoing investigation. Together, they form a collective refusal to accept that this story might remain forever unfinished. As our investigation draws to a close, we're left with questions that have persisted for decades. Questions that continue to challenge our understanding of what's possible, what's probable, and what remains unexplained. What happened in those critical early morning hours that allowed three adults to vanish without alerting neighbors? The houses on either side were occupied, windows open on a warm summer night. Yet no one reported unusual sounds, no cries for help, no vehicle doors slamming, no evidence of the moment when three lives were interrupted. What does the broken porch light truly signify? Was it broken before the women disappeared? A random act of vandalism? Was it broken during their removal from the house? Or was it broken deliberately, a lure to draw someone to the door? And perhaps most tellingly, who swept the glass into a neat pile, and why? The erased answering machine messages represent another critical unknown. The technology of the time would have required someone to physically press buttons on the machine to clear the messages. Who did this, and what communications were they attempting to hide? The most compelling physical evidence may still remain undiscovered. Underground locations, bodies of water, remote rural properties, thousands of potential sites within reasonable driving distance have never been searched. Could the women's remains be located just beyond the range of previous search efforts? There are witnesses who have never come forward. Statistical analysis of similar cases suggests multiple individuals likely possess knowledge of what happened, whether as perpetrators, witnesses to suspicious activity, or confidants who received partial confessions years later. What keeps them silent? Fear? Loyalty? Uncertainty about the significance of what they know? And perhaps most fundamentally, why has physical evidence proven so elusive? In an era before widespread DNA awareness and forensic television programs, perpetrators were generally less sophisticated about evidence concealment. Yet this case has yielded almost nothing. No fingerprints, no fibers, no biological evidence linking any suspect to the scene. These questions frame a mystery that may never be fully resolved. Yet they also represent hope. Each question potentially answerable, each answer potentially leading to the truth that has remained hidden for so long. The disappearance of three women from a modest suburban home represents more than just an unsolved crime. It challenges our fundamental assumptions about safety, about the reliability of evidence, about the limits of investigation, and about our ability to make sense of the seemingly impossible. For the families, the absence of answers has created a unique form of grief, one suspended between hope and despair, between searching and mourning. Their lives have been defined by absence, by questions without resolution, by memories without conclusion. For the community, the case remains an open wound, a reminder that even in familiar places surrounded by neighbors, inexplicable events can occur without warning or explanation. The neighborhood where the women live has changed physically over the decades, but the shadow of uncertainty still touches those who live there. For investigators, this case represents both a professional challenge and a profound responsibility. Those who worked the case in its early days have largely retired, passing their knowledge and commitment to younger detectives who continue the search for answers. I can't tell you how many times I've walked through that house in my mind, shared the original lead detective, now in his 70s, trying to see what I missed, what might still be hiding in plain sight. The case never leaves you. Not really. The story of these three women matters. Not because their disappearance was spectacular or unusual, though it was both those things, but because it reminds us of our fundamental human need for explanations, for conclusions, for stories that make sense of our world. Their story reminds us that behind every unsolved case are individuals whose absence is felt daily by those who love them. Their story reminds us that mysteries aren't merely intellectual puzzles, but ruptures in the fabric of actual lives. Their story reminds us that truth matters, that answers matter, that remembering matters. And so we continue to ask the questions, to examine the evidence, to consider new possibilities. We do this not only in hope of resolution, but in recognition that asking these questions is itself an act of remembrance, an acknowledgement that 3 women vanished on a summer night, and that fact alone deserves our continued attention. They were here, they mattered, and they deserve to be found. Behind every unsolved mystery is a story that matters. Subscribe and help keep their stories alive.